Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we're jumping into a beer from Alesong Brewing and Blending. We've reviewed a few of their beers, but it's definitely been a while. This is one that I've had for a little bit, but I've been saving. This is called Maestro, and it is a bourbon barrel-aged barley wine that clocks in at 13.2% ABV. Alesong Brewing and Blending is based in Eugene, Oregon. So label art on this one, as always with theirs, is just a clean design. It has their name and the name of the beer. Nothing too much to talk about. But on the back, they do give us more specifics about the barrel. This one, they used Heaven Hill bourbon barrels. We've had quite a few beers that use that bourbon, all very nice. So we get our trusty pointy end of our bottle opener here, and I'm just gonna try to get this kind of foil cut, there we go, underneath, so we can get that out of the way. And then we should have no problem getting a good grip on the cap. Perfect. Right off. All right, and as we typically do with our barley wines, we're going to use our stout glass. Works very well for this style. Maybe one day I will see if I can find a dedicated barley wine glass, but honestly, the shape works great. So we're going to get this poured right in. This is that classic caramelly colored barley wine. I'm going to give a little bit of aggression down the middle there, give it a chance to form a head. Barley wines do tend to be very active in terms of carbonation, so they can oftentimes, if not more often than not, collapse a head, even if they form a really, really nice one, which this one appears to have done a pretty good job. So, big aroma already jumping off of this beer. I mean, it's massive. It really is quite pronounced. Visually, yep, absolutely just a beautiful, true caramel color. Prototypical for barley wine. They can run quite a big spectrum of color ranges, including black. I've had a black barley wine. It was absolutely delicious. Very active in terms of carbonation in this one. Looks like a mix of mostly medium with some fine champagne-like bubbles. So it did form an okay head, but I don't expect that to stick around too terribly much longer. But nonetheless, it is what it is. It looks nice. Let's get right up over it for a proper sniff. See what we get. Wow. There's actually a lot, aside from the bourbon, which you would expect, there's a lot of kind of a doughy grain-like quality coming out as a dominant aroma on this. You don't often get that in barley wine. So I've got this bourbon, I've got a lot of caramel and toffee coming out of this, and this kind of doughy grain-like quality. In fact, on this one, I'm really not picking up any of the typical kind of fruit aromas you normally get on a barley wine. It's very much the malt bill and the barrel that's really popping out at me, but it smells absolutely fantastic. So we're going to just jump in and see what this flavor profile is about. Take one. Ooh, that is a very big beer. Yeah, very big beer indeed. So there are elements of the aroma profile that translate into the flavor profile, but the flavor profile is distinctly different. So I wasn't really getting any of those kind of fruit accents, but they're absolutely present in this glass. So before I even get to that, let's talk weight, and then we'll talk texture. The weight on this beer, for 13.2%, it does not feel heavy at all. It's definitely below average for a barley wine, certainly in this ABV range. If anything, I would say medium, and that's being kind. It really doesn't feel heavy, so it doesn't have that presence you would expect on the weight end of things, which maybe some people view that as a positive, but it's definitely a deviation from the norm. In terms of the mouthfeel, on the other hand, though, you can really feel the thickness of this beer. It's 13.2%, it's a barley wine. There's a ton of resistance on this one. This is not one where agitation on the palate really gets creamy, silky, nothing like that, but you can really feel the thickness of the beer. So the mouthfeel, pretty big dichotomy to the body by comparison. So the flavor profile. First thing I noticed was that the caramel and toffee undercurrents in the malt bill of this beer really do pop out at you, and they pop out in tandem with that bourbon barrel up front. So it's distinctly bourbon plus caramel plus toffee. This also has, for quite a few seconds on the front, as soon as you swallow, a pretty substantial boozy quality to it. You know, that's off-putting to some, and you don't always get it in all beers that are high ABV, but it can often happen. And look, this is a barrel-aged 13.2% beer. It's gonna have potential for a little booziness. It's not off-putting to me. It reminds you, yes, that's right, I'm drinking a very big beer here. But it's there, just so you know. And in terms of outside of the flavor profiles already described, as I mentioned on the nose, I'm not really getting any fruit. But in the glass, I definitely am. And in this one, it's not really plums and things of that nature, but it's more almost like peach and apricot as stone fruit. And there was a little bit of fig. Fig is pretty common in barley wines, and that's definitely present in this one. So it's kind of a mix of apricot and fig and peaches on the fruit side. Peaches are more rare, but it's distinct in this one. It's actually quite nice. And as per usual, when you have all these rich layers of toffee and caramel flavors that are popping out of the malt bill, it does really put one in mind of like a cobbler with caramelized sugars. It's really, really quite delicious. So I'm going to jump back in. I'm going to let everything re-intensify in second sip, see if I can pick anything else out. Then we'll talk about the finish. But this is a very, very tasty barrel-aged barley wine. So take two. Big bourbon, caramel toffee right up front. A little bit of that booziness. Get these caramelized sugar notes. Some of that's probably coming from the barrel. And then, yeah, definite distinct fig, apricot. And the peaches come in, seems to me, right around the 7-8 second mark after the sip. And it's when kind of the intensity of the caramel and the toffee malt bill flavors kind of dial back just a little bit, and that intensity of the bourbon barrel dials back a little bit, then everything starts to kind of open up and intermingle. Once they get on that even plateau of intensity, that's when you start to really pick out the more fruity accents in this, and it's very, very nice. So really on second sip, it is just a re-intensification. I'm not getting anything new on the second sip that I didn't get on the first, but it's just delicious to jump back in again. In terms of the finish, so this is a bourbon barrel-aged barley wine. It does have big, bold intensity of flavor, as you would expect from a big barrel-aged barley wine. But while it is above average in terms of the length of the finish on this one, this is not one of those really, really absurdly long finishes. So the way that it ends is with just a touch of that bourbon on the back, and you can still get some of this underlying fig and caramel and toffee. And once it gets to the really not that discernible, it kind of starts to speed up its progression off the back of the palate. So I would say, yeah, it is above average, but it's not as long as many, many, many out there. So it's very nice. And as you would expect, there's no dryness at all. This is a big, wet beer, and it feels big, wet, and substantive all the way to the end, and very nice and clean, and it just disappears until it's finally gone from the palate. But absolutely delicious. This is just another great example of why I personally love barley wines so much. I love their intensity, I love their complexity, and they're all a little bit different, and you never really know what you're gonna get. But I can tell you, I'm a big fan of this one. I'm gonna take my time, sip on this, go at my scores. When we come back, we'll get this beer ranked from top to bottom. All right, now we're going to get this beer ranked. This was Alesong Brewing and Blending's Maestro, a bourbon barrel-aged barley wine clocking in at 13.2% ABV. Alesong Brewing and Blending is based in Eugene, Oregon. So starting with the aroma, this was classic barrel-aged barley wine, very, very pungent indeed. This one was a little bit different in terms of the aroma profile. The bourbon really jumped out at you, and tons of caramel and toffee, as well as a lot of grainy and dough-like aromas, but very, very limited on the fruit side, which you normally get in a barley wine. But it smelled fantastic, and certainly was well above average. The aroma does get a perfect 10 out of 10. For the taste on this beer was exceptional. A lot of what came through in the aroma did also translate into the glass. but notable exceptions being that very grainy and kind of doughy aroma did not make its way into the flavor profile. And while there was a noticeable absence of fruit aroma, there were fruit elements noticeable in the beer, as is typical with a barley wine. It was absolutely fantastic, hugely pungent, very layered. Everything had its own voice. The taste does get a perfect 10 out of 10. For the body on this was definitely below average, specifically for the style and for the ABV range, any way you want to examine it. It was really maybe just medium. And on a 13.2% barley wine, that is definitely below average. The body does get a 3 out of 10. For the mouthfeel. Mouthfeel on this beer was a completely different story. It had a boatload of resistance, exactly as expected for the style in the ABV range, and it really did help offset that relatively lighter body by comparison. Mouthfeel does get a perfect 10 out of 10. For the finish, this was a barrel-aged barley wine. It was above average, but it wasn't really top tier. It compared to a lot of other barley wines and barrel-aged, that's kind of the yardstick. It's style specific. As I said, this one was above average, but it wasn't the upper echelon. The finish does get a 7 out of 10. For the head and retention, this one did okay. It did fine. It was really low end of average. It did a decent job forming, but it collapsed pretty quickly. And barley wines are all over the place. It is what it is. Head and retention gets a 4 out of 10. For the appearance, this was that classic caramel colored barley wine, exactly in the spectrum, and the appearance does get a 10 out of 10. For the balance on this beer was phenomenal. Specifically in something like this, we're talking about the balance between the ingredients that they use for the base beer and the barrels. Picking the right barrel, picking the requisite amount of time to age it so that the beer tastes like it should, the barrel does its thing, and they all work together. They absolutely nailed it. The balance gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Filling in the intangible, subjectively, I loved it. I'm a big barley wine fan. I love barrel-aged ones. I thought this was delicious. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10 for me. Finally, as an example of the style. So this beer did quite well in most categories, and I did kind of teeter-totter where I thought the score on this final category should be. It did lose some pretty big points, notably in body, in head and retention, and then a few in finish. And so there were some deviations from the norm, but this was a very strong beer. I could have gone either way 1 point, but I decided to just kind of go with my first gut reaction, and I only docked 1 point here as an example of the style, because I thought they did a really great job. And this certainly is a great example of what a barrel-aged barley wine is all about. So example of the style gets a 9 out of 10, which does bring the total score on Alesong Brewing and Blending's Maestro to an 83 out of 100. So well above average beer here, guys. If you're into big, bold, flavored beers, maybe you've not tried that many or never had a barley wine, but you drink big imperial stouts or barrel-aged stouts, porters, things of that nature, definitely do yourself a favor and try a barley wine at some time. And if you're a barley wine fan, then yeah, this is definitely going to be for you. This is just another extremely well-done barrel-aged barley wine. I would recommend this one to any big, bold, intense flavored beer fan. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. If you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live, just turn on your notifications, hit that bell icon. It's right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.